So next, let's zoom in on key issues in the education field. We're privileged to have here today 4 experts who have kindly agreed to offer a series of lightning talks in key topics. Our host and moderator for this session is David Kleeman. He's Senior Vice President of Global Trends for Dubbit, a UK-based strategy and consultancy and digital studio. David is also a longtime thought leader in the children's media industry. I'm sure many of you already know him. And he is also a friend and ally of the Cooney Center. And frankly, I would bet there's a very large number of people here and elsewhere who would describe him as a friend and ally. And now I will invite him to kick things off. Thank you, David.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael. And what a great start to the conference just now. I'm really fascinated to moderate this session because Dubbit has done substantial work around children 6 to 12 in virtual reality as a way of exploring if the 13 plus recommendations are abundance of caution or if they're based in development or physiology or psychology. My career has been entirely around children in media, but in this session, we're going to be mostly focused on older learners, on high school. I came across a great quote about the metaverse just yesterday from a founder of what might be the original metaverse, Club Penguin. Lane Merrifield, among other things, called it the metaverse an alternate universe that grows and ebbs and thrives and evolves based on the way its users want it to and influence it to. So the metaverse, or maybe it's the metaverses, won't be limited to a single technology or platform, but will connect Web 2, Web 3, virtual reality, augmented reality, actual reality, and some things that we just haven't even realized yet. And it'll connect them in an organic set of experiences that will kind of orbit one another, that will influence one another, and that will often connect with one another. Today, we're focused on VR, AR, XR, and their potential to bring real-world benefit to learners of all ages, to the curious, to those whose stories are too often missing. The speakers, wonderful set of speakers, are about to present their lightning talks. They're all seeking to create or help others to create that sort of growing and ebbing, thriving and evolving immersive spaces and experience. Each one is going to present their work, and then we should have time for discussion among them and for a few questions. So let me briefly introduce all 4 of the speakers, and then one at a time I'll launch them into their lightning talks. So we have Idris Brewer, who's Brewster, who's the founder of Movers and Shakers, an ed tech nonprofit that is surfacing underrepresented histories and making them visible via augmented reality. We have Sam Bindman, Director of Research at Foundry 10, an education research organization that's devoted to expanding the visions of learning. Julia Woodward, PhD candidate at the University of Florida, who this fall will join the University of South Florida in their Department of Computer Science and Engineering. And Regine Gilbert, who a user experience designer and educator at NYU, focused on accessibility in digital and immersive settings, starting from human experience. I'm going to start with Idris Brewster, who is, as I say, founder of Movers and Shakers NYC. He's going to share his insights on building diverse content, in particular, a remarkable effort that uses augmented reality to center often missing people and events of Black and Brown history in fun, engaging, and revealing ways. Idris.
Hi, everybody. First off, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about the work and the 2 specific projects and experiences that I've built around diverse narratives and augmented reality. So that's going to be the topic for today. And so hi, again, my name's Idris. I'm the founder of Movers and Shakers. And Movers and Shakers is an ed tech nonprofit that uses augmented reality to uplift diverse narratives from Black, Brown, Indigenous, and queer communities, and use augmented reality technology to make those accessible, both within our public spaces and within our classrooms. Our mission as Movers and Shakers is to uproot oppressive systems and reimagine and rebuild an equitable world. And the way that I think the best way to do that is through narrative change. And so we want to be able to create accessibility to diverse narratives so that kids in schools and folks within public spaces can see themselves represented and feel like a sense of belonging. And narrative change is one of the most important ways to start the wheel of actual systemic change within our country. How we started in 2017. My partner Glenn and I, we had a collective of artists and activists that use AR to create experiences that told diverse and true stories from history. How we would do it is we would host teach-ins and demonstrations at monuments across New York City to really highlight the inequities that exist within our monuments representation, not only within New York City, but around in our country as a whole. If you look at New York City as a specific case, there are 155 plus monuments to white men, and only 6 monuments to women, and very little monuments to people of color. And that is a slowly shifting landscape, but to create physical monuments, that's going to cost around $1 million per monument. The new Shirley Chisholm statue is going to cost, that's around how much it costs. And so for us, that process wasn't fast enough. And so we wanted to create digital monuments that could be placed anywhere that anyone could access. And we wanted to just use AR to sidestep a lot of the bureaucratic processes and put up as many monuments of people as we wanted. We could create hundreds and hundreds of monuments for the price of one physical statue. And so that was the genesis of what we were doing. And we did a lot of public spaces and activism work. But through that process, what we realized is that this was a great tool for immersing folks in histories, bringing history to life, but making this information more accessible through this augmented reality medium. And so the first experience that we built was called Kinfolk. And Kinfolk is an augmented reality archive of Black and Brown history that has digital monuments of people from history that are not usually represented within our public spaces and not usually represented within our classrooms. This is being used as a tool in classrooms across the country right now. And so we're really excited for how it's been turning out. We released it in February of 2021 for Black History Month. We released 6 monuments. 4 of those monuments were commissioned by Netflix. And how the app works is when you're in your environment, whether it's your living room, your classroom, or a public space or a park, you would select from a menu of monuments and you could place those monuments on the floor or on a table. And then when you place those monuments, you could read a bio you could read a biography of the figure. You could go and delve into the archives, which would create a curriculum to go with each of these figures that allowed people to deep dive into these narratives. And if you just wanted to hear or see more information about the figure, you could listen to a podcast, a specific Spotify playlist, different books and videos and movies. And so we wanted to, again, create a way that students and folks alike could deep dive into this information wherever they are. And so now where we are at with Kinfolk, that was like a year or so ago. And now where we're at now is that we're looking to actually activate physical locations with Kinfolk. And so we've just received a grant that allows us to add geolocation. And so with geolocation, we can bring these digital experiences and create and activate them in place-based ways that allow students to go on field trips to look at these histories within their own communities. We allow people walking along the street of Central Park to finally see the hidden histories that have been buried there through the building of Central Park. And so there's a bunch of histories that need to be unearthed. And so we're doing the legwork of working with historians, curriculum writers, educators, artists, designers to bring these histories to life in a new way that's accessible. And so as a company, we really have 2 verticals in the ways that we work these 2 verticals are working together. The one that you just saw, Kinfolk, is in the streets, bringing history to life in public spaces. But another way that we want to affect change and impact is inside the classroom. And so that's a different experience that we built called Unsung. Unsung is a multiplayer augmented reality learning experience that focuses on the lives of important figures of color. And how it works is specifically designed for a classroom. Each student gets access to an iPad. They join on teams of 4, and they basically have to travel through history and collect artifacts and work together as a team to be able to refill the archive, an archive that has been getting erased and burned down. And so the students, what's really fun about Unsung is that it really uses this technology to provide a collaborative way and a collaborative experience. So through digital means, it really promotes in classroom physical collaboration. And it's right now, it's on the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools platform, which is accessible to any school that wants to join. Right now, we have a reach of around 300,000 students. And so I'm really excited for this experience because it meets students where they're at. I think a lot of the feedback that we've got from students is that when they're at home, they're on playing Fortnite, they're on TikTok, they're FaceTiming, they have really visual ways of engaging with information, but sometimes within the classroom, they don't get that same level of engagement. But with Unsung, what it's allowed to do is it's allowed them to engage with this historical information in a way that is intuitive for them. I mean, a lot of older folks potentially struggle with using Unsung, but the kids pick it up like they've been using it for years. And so this is something that we really want to build out more of these experiences and really prove that augmented reality in the classroom can be a great way to uplift these narratives. And so I have a little video to end the talk, and so here it is. Okay, and so thank you very much for listening to me and taking the time to hear a very, very fast lightning talk. Please reach out to me at Idris@shakers.tech if you have any further questions. So thank you for your time.
That was a lightning talk indeed, and thanks for that. I'm saving most questions to the end, but I know that you have to leave a little bit early, so I wanted to pose one to you, and that is, how often do you add to the collection, particularly in Kinfolk or update with new stories? And do you engage your users? Do you engage the students in deciding what the next stories will be? What stories are left untold that they'd like to see presented?
That's a great question. I mean, I think up until this point, we've created our own stories that us and Movers and Shakers wanted to get out there. But I think the next step of this and what we're going to be engaging with is engaging with communities of students, of community leaders to figure out what stories are best told through this medium. And so as the grant that I told you we got earlier has allowed us to create, we're going to create 100 new monuments over the next 2 years. That's 100 new stories, and we're going to be engaging. We have a robust community engagement plan where we would like to onboard people onto Kinfolk and have a two-way conversation with them to see who they want to represent, and that's going to really be the guide for us in terms of what new content we create for Unsung and Kinfolk, because we don't really want to be the central place institution that's deciding what histories are unearthed that would be replicating a lot of the inequities that are within our society today. So we really want to make sure as a tech platform, as a platform for monuments and histories, that we are open to the community and whoever they want to see represented.
One of the things that strikes me is that there's great potential there for young people to also be creators. It's one of the things I want to bring up in the discussion is AR and VR as mediums for creation, not just consumption. But this seems like a great opportunity to build a toolkit so that they can create their own.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's definitely a part of our roadmap. And I think one type of curriculum that we're really interested in going towards is design curriculum. And we can use what we've created to allow students to create their own worlds, to create their own monuments, and really give them that more sense of, just get them more involved in the process as much as possible.
That's great.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
Regina Gilbert is going to be our next lightning talk. And to my mind, one great thing about being in the early days of the metaverse is that we have the opportunity to learn from and avoid past mistakes. Too often in the past, we've designed technology or services that are unattainable for a lot of people for a variety of reasons. So Regina is going to be talking about universal learning design in support of inclusion and accessibility. Regina.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here speaking with you all about universal design for learning applied to XR. Next slide. So here I have an image from Chrissy Butler. In the center, it says UDL learning, and there are 5 circles around that circle. The first one is, what do we know about learners and context? The second is, what are we here to do? The third is, identify potential barriers to learning. The fourth is identify universal supports. Next is use UDL guidelines to design learning, and teach, evaluate, revise. So universal design for learning, for those who don't know, in essence is multiple means of engagement. And when we're thinking about virtual reality or augmented reality, we tend to think of mobile devices, headsets, or potentially web VR. So next slide. So here I have an image of there's 4 different people, and the question at the top asks, why universal design for learning? Because classrooms are filled with students who have different needs, come from different educational backgrounds, have different attention spans and interest, have different language abilities, and have different cultural backgrounds. So what does this mean for us, right? Not everyone has access to high-speed internet. Not everyone knows English. And when it comes to the experiences that we share in virtual reality or augmented reality, are we sharing things that can be accessed by folks with disabilities? Now, I'm coming to you all with more questions than I do have for answers, because this is what my research is. I'm currently researching inclusion and accessibility in the XR space, so both augmented reality and virtual reality. So I'll just quickly tell a story of how I got into this. I get the pleasure of co-teaching an assistive technology class, which teaches students about the technology that blind and low vision folks use. I happen to co-teach the class with Gus Chalkias, and Gus is blind. This was a few years back. I mentioned to him I was playing Pokemon Go, and he said, well, what is that? A lot of you on here will know what Pokemon Go is. For those of you who don't know what Pokemon Go is, it is a mobile augmented reality game where you go around a city and you chase Pokemon and you have a lot of fun and get some exercise. And so I told him about this, and he said, or asked, or no, he said, sorry, he said, why can't I play it? I wish I could. And I thought to myself, why can't he play it? And why aren't we using things like universal design for learning, where we're offering multiple means of engagement for different type of AR and VR experiences? So that got me into thinking. So the last thing I have left for you all is some questions for all of us to think about. Next slide. So my question is, I have 4 of them. How will assistive technologies work with XR? Could there be multiple ways of it experiencing the same thing? Are there multiple physical modalities for the experience? And how might we ensure all students can participate? And on this slide, I have an image of a animated cardboard VR headset with a mobile device sitting on top. So this is thinking about universal design for learning applied to XR. And that is my lightning talk. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Bindman, Director of Research at Foundry 10 in Seattle. And Foundry 10 is an education research organization with a philanthropic focus on expanding ideas about learning and creating direct value for youth. And today I'm going to share some of the findings from our multi-year line of research on virtual reality in the classroom. And I'm going to focus on the importance and challenges of assessing students' learning. And just a note that this research was spearheaded by Foundry 10 co-founder and CEO, Lisa Castaneda, along with myself and a whole team of folks from Foundry 10. So at Foundry 10, we're really motivated by understanding the impact of XR on student learning when used in real classrooms. So when you think about all the excitement and potential around getting XR tools into the classroom, we got actually really interested in how that learning can be assessed. So if you're familiar with technology implementation frameworks, you might have noticed that assessment is not a main focus. And that's been true in our research as well. So in 1 year of our study, we had 33 educators, and only 3 of them were thinking about how to assess student learning after their VR experiences. From our work, we know that XR can have a lot of different benefits for learning. For example, XR experiences can provide learners with new insights and challenge their misconceptions. So one biology teacher in our study told us that she saw students realizing for the first time that hemoglobin is not the same as a red blood cell because they used a VR simulation to move around different elements in the bloodstream. We also know that XR experiences provide new opportunities to explore different places and materials that they wouldn't normally have access to. So we've seen world languages students who use the Google Maps app to explore different places and cultures where their new languages are spoken. And finally, XR experiences might reduce some of the cognitive load of having to read and process information. And they also use storytelling and other techniques to help students connect with the material on a deeper level. So what does all of this mean for assessment? So we need to think more creatively about what we hope students will gain, but at the same time, we need to have clear and specific learning objectives for these experiences. So educators should think about, why am I choosing this content, and is it additive in some way relative to my other content? Some of the traditional assessment formats, like a multiple choice test, might not capture this learning. For example, some educators in our study found it really useful to do a formative assessment, like a brief exit ticket quiz. And other educators found it useful to have students create a larger portfolio of work to address some of the larger questions in learning that they got. And with all of this, student feedback is a key component. So students can tell us whether the XR was helpful for their learning, and just as importantly, they can say whether the assessment captured what they learned. So in terms of student feedback, here's some data from 200 students in the last year of our study. The majority of the students, around 75%, said that using VR was valuable for their learning. However, there was about a quarter of the students who saw less value or said that they weren't sure. So you can see how important it would be for educators to ask for student feedback if it means finding out that a significant portion of their students didn't really see value in the experience for their learning, or they just weren't sure. In this case, some students felt discomfort while using the tool, and other students felt like the VR activity actually created a confusing or stressful environment, and they found it hard to practice or learn a specific concept. Or some students just preferred other more conventional mediums. So when we talked to teachers about assessment, they found it difficult to compare their lessons before using VR, but they did say that more open-ended assessments would be helpful because the VR experiences don't just provide students with basic facts to recall later on a test. And like I said before, they also suggested that formative assessments and also discussions can help students reflect and organize their thoughts so they know what the key takeaways were from the experience. And we even had a couple of creative world languages teachers who used a VR experience itself as a time to observe and assess students' language skills. Overall, we saw that students in this part of our study felt like the assessments they took in class were a fair way to show and measure what they had learned. But when we asked the question in a slightly different way, again, about a third of students were not sure or said that the assessment their teacher used was not a good way to capture what they learned in VR. So in their comments, students said that they weren't sure how they were being assessed through the different assignments and activities that they did. And one student, they said they needed a summary assignment or an activity to cement their understanding. Another student suggested that projects would be a better way to show what they had learned. We also wanted to mention that despite all of the advancements in XR technology, educators still need a lot of support with technical challenges. So throughout all of our years of research, we've seen teachers just struggle so much with technical issues that limit their ability to use XR experiences effectively in the classroom. So it takes them so much time and energy to set up the proper hardware, internet connections, power sources, and so forth to use VR and XR. And that makes it probably even more important that teachers have tools for assessing students' learning and continuing to make improvements for the next time they're going to use XR in the classroom. And I wanted to just summarize by showing you a couple of key quotes from our work. The first is from a youth participant in our research who talks about how a VR experience brought about a real breakthrough in their understanding of a historical event. In this case, the experience of soldiers in the trenches during World War I. And in the second quote, we hear from a biology teacher who observed a similar breakthrough moments in her students, which were really great for their learning, but it also makes assessment more complicated because the students are learning material that's beyond what they need to know for their standardized test. Overall, our ultimate goal is to support educators so that they have the tools they need to think about assessment from the beginning, and then gather the data they need to make improvements and find ways of using XR tools that are going to work best for their students. Thank you.
Very much, Sam. That's good, and there are some things that I do want to come back to in the Q&A later, but I'm going to go on right now to Julia Woodward, who's going to share kind of a foundational overview of augmented reality and its benefits and its challenges, particularly focusing on its potential in increasing students' learning and motivation. So, Julia, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Julia Woodward, and today I'll be talking about augmented reality, creating immersive and interactive experiences. Next slide, please. So augmented reality, or AR, allows users to see and interact with virtual objects projected on top of the real world, which allows for a rich, immersive, and interactive experiences and technologies. Next slide, please. So in comparing augmented reality to virtual reality, AR is close to virtual reality in providing synthetic computer-generated data and objects. However, it is closer to physical reality in terms of remaining in the physical world. Next, please. So AR is being applied in a wide range of contexts, from healthcare, gaming, to education. And AR also spans a range of devices that have different affordances and capabilities. Next. For example, AR applications can be created for smartphones, for tablets, for AR headsets, as well as projectors. Next. So these images are just a couple of examples of how AR looks for these specific devices and what they can be used for. For example, we can have educational science applications for tablets, as well as see different virtual objects in our environment, such as a panda in our living room. And these images also show the benefit of AR headsets and projectors for AR and their hands-free capabilities. Next. So when looking at AR in education, there really are a lot of benefits. It can help with experiential learning, so hands-on learning, collaborative learning, really help visualize complex phenomenon and abstract problems. And AR can really also help with spatial knowledge, since users and students can see virtual elements in the real world in 3D instead of viewing things on a 2D screen or a textbook or sheet of paper. And this image here is an example of how AR can be used for a projector. This is called AR Sandbox, which helps really visualize topography and allows students and people to collaborate and interact together. Next slide. So just a couple of examples of how AR can be used in education. For example, prior work has looked at creating an AR activity about circuits for high school students that could really help concentration and positive moods when compared to a web-based activity. AR can also help with virtual field trips, such as going to the Grand Canyon and seeing different places that they might not get the chance to see. And in this prior work, it really helped increase interest in geosciences. And AR can also help with accessibility. In this example, prior work looked at using AR headsets to help facilitate sign language in learning environments for deaf and hard of hearing students, so they could visualize and see the sign language at the same time as the educator. Next slide. So AR does have a lot of benefits for education. For example, one being keeping students grounded in reality. And one benefit to this is safety, since students can still see who is around them and the environment around them while having these very immersive experiences. AR also lets students compare elements against the real world, and students can collaborate and interact with other students, especially for mobile AR, such as on tablets or smartphones. Another benefit to AR is that VR sickness is not an issue. So I personally suffer from VR sickness and have a really hard time in VR, which this can be difficult for students if they want to have an immersive experience, but they can't use virtual reality. And this really isn't a problem in AR, which can really increase how many people can use it in the classroom and for other experiences. Next slide. However, although there's benefits, there's still some cons and challenges to AR. For example, for mobile AR with tablets and smartphones, it really limits hand use. As you can see in the image here, the user is holding the tablet, so they can't really be able to interact with the dinosaur and have a more immersive experience. There's also hardware limitations and low field of view. The virtual experience is really constrained to the view from the device, whether it be a mobile tablet or AR headset. And another con and challenge is really cost. AR headsets can be very expensive, as well as even with smartphones and tablets, it might be expensive to incorporate that into the classroom. Next slide. So in moving towards incorporating AR into the classroom, one question is, how do we design content with students in mind in order to meet their perceptions and expectations to increase usability and really design for specific populations? I'm currently looking at this question in two of my projects. One, I'm looking at how to analyze and design information in AR headsets to help with noticeability, recall of information, and cognitive workload for both adults and children, which can really help in an educational context. Also, another of my projects, we looked at understanding children's perceptions of AR headsets to match their expectations and increase usability, especially since they are starting to use AR headsets in different contexts, such as the classroom and museums. And this really can be looked at and analyzed for high school students as well. Next slide. So while I'm looking at those two projects, I really do want to leave you with a couple of questions, and there's still a lot of open research questions and looking at AR in education. One being, how do we design meaningful educational experiences? And when do we use AR in the classroom to really enhance education and not just take away from traditional methods and really have this beneficial experience? Also, what is the right format and device? Is it a tablet? Is it a headset? While mobile devices may be cheaper, AR headsets might have more immersive capabilities and experiences. Also, how do we contextualize the experiences for the students? And how really can researchers and designers help and support educators? Next slide. So thank you very much. That is my brief lightning talk. Thank you all for coming.
I think we're going to bring everyone back on stage at this point. I know that we have. I know that Regine has to leave somewhat early, so I have a quick question for you that I think may then spread to the other panelists as well, and that has to do with I see Michael Preston has it as well. What lessons can we learn from your methods that as producers and educators design for kids? And in particular, at what point do you want to be brought in to ensure that the resulting production is accessible and reaches all the potential audience?
Oh, so I mean, I think we need to think about who are we excluding from the very beginning of things, right? One of the things that was mentioned was sickness with VR. I mean, one of the things with VR and AR is that there is a lot of risk. When I was doing my IRB, which you do in academia when you do research with human beings, you have to put the list of risks associated. I had no idea until I actually started researching this, the level of risk associated. And so I think with that understanding, thinking about who are we excluding from the beginning, which is oftentimes people with disabilities, people with lower economic, socioeconomic status, right? And people who don't have access to maybe like the high-speed internets. So to me, that's a beginning, right? Who can use this and who can't use this? And then what are we doing for those students who can't use it, right? How are we adjusting things? So that's just my 2 cents.
So for the creators of VR and AR, they may not realize that, who they're leaving out. They have a core conception of what it is they want to do. So bring you in at the beginning to say, have you considered that this design that you're talking about is going to be difficult for A, B, and C, or is not going to include the voices of some people? Is that the idea, that make it an iterative process through the production?
Well, so I spoke last week or a week and a half ago at Stanford during their HCI lecture series. And someone came up to me afterward and said, I'm a creator. I have a small team. We can't make things accessible, which I hear all the time, which is super frustrating to me as an advocate for accessibility. So what I am working on now is to say, if you have a small team of 1 or 2, how are you incorporating accessibility into your product roadmap so that you are making it? Because in my past life, I was a product manager and project manager. So there are things that can be done that don't have to be big, that content creators can do to make things accessible. The problem is that a lot of content creators see accessibility and inclusion as this whole extra big step because they're looking at it as a chunk instead of breaking that into pieces, right? And so if you're breaking things into pieces, think of a building. You don't just throw a bunch of bricks, right? You lay things brick by brick by brick. If it's messed up, you take that brick out, or sometimes you knock it down. But this is how you do it, right? You don't just throw bricks. And right now, I feel like there's a bunch of bricks being thrown and things getting broken and people not being able to experience things. So, yeah.
That's interesting. And in the game world, design sprints, doing things a step at a time and then reviewing is a fairly common thing. A question for everyone. We've talked substantially about these AR and VR as being media for consumption. What do they also have potential for kids to create their own? I posed it briefly to Idris, but how do we turn these into media that make young people creators as well as consumers? That's open to anyone who wants to
go for that one. No, I think that's an important topic to focus on, and really keeping students involved in everything. Kind of going off of the last question, is also keeping students involved in the design of content for them, really looking at their perceptions and expectations and designing for them, and keeping them involved throughout the whole design process, I think is really important. But I think incorporating more opportunities for them to actually create content is very beneficial. So they get the immersive experiences and they can still be the consumers. However, they do see that behind the scenes and how things work. And I've seen really children and students get really excited about the opportunities they have with these different devices.
I've long had kind of in the back of my mind that and I was thinking about it when you were presenting, Julia, that one of the ideal uses for AR could be news. That when a news team goes out and covers a story, that they could embed it at that location, that something news happened here, and help young people understand that news doesn't just happen far away. It just doesn't just happen to other people. There's news everywhere, and that they would be able to discover that as they went along. Question for Sam. Apart from the surveys with children and teachers, what other measures were used to evaluate XR's benefits for learning? For example, against curriculum or set objectives? In other words, how do you define the benefits?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, now that I get a chance to talk a little more, I can tell you about the way we structured our work, which was to have a set of 6 teachers actually try to assess the XR benefits for learning in their classroom. And they actually had the freedom to try out whatever approach they wanted. So I think I talked about some of the examples in my talk, but we had teachers trying everything from their regular unit exam to having students create an entire portfolio of work from different countries that they had visited through Google Maps and what they saw there. So I think the question is great because teachers do struggle with this because they're seeing that their students are getting new insights and things that they didn't get before. So it's like, okay, my old test, my unit exam from last year, it's not really going to capture it. So they're being challenged to think of like different ways to measure their students' learning. And overall, it seems like some of the more open-ended formats can be helpful. So this is exactly kind of what we were seeing teachers grapple with in our study.
I think a related question for both of you. What is the ideal kind of role for educators in embedding AR and VR into the curriculum? If you look at the Brookings report on education and VR, there's education in the metaverse. There's a wonderful description of a VR experience where the teacher sort of lays down the foundation, then they go into the experience, and then they know what they're responsible for coming out. How do you talk about preparing teachers to really use, to lay the foundation for use of VR or AR?
Yeah, well, we saw some of this in our work. Students kind of struggled when the teachers didn't set up kind of concrete learning objectives for them or give them some kind of introduction that once you get into the virtual space, here's kind of what you're looking for, or here's what you're learning today. Because otherwise, you're just in an entire space and different things may be happening and it's not clear to students what's really important. So we think about that. And just as a side note, I think some kind of trailer or way of getting introduced to the experience is really important because, let's face it, sometimes the experiences can be a little scary. So, I mean, that's definitely a big role for educators too, because in a classroom of kids, you know that some students are going to react differently than others. And then, I've talked before about how after the experience, a debrief of some kind or reflection can also really help students figure out, okay, here were the key pieces that I was taking away from this.
That actually matches really well with what Dubbit found in its VR research with younger kids, that basically they onboarded better and they had a better experience if they had seen either a YouTube video or some other something else ahead of time to know what to expect, or what even watching a peer go into the headset before them and seeing how they reacted helped them in that. Julia, do you have thoughts about that with AR, about how the teacher can best incorporate it into the curriculum?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important topic, and was one of my final questions to think about is really how do we contextualize these experiences instead of just handing students oh, look at this cool technology. I think it really is important for educators to set the scene and debrief, like Sam was talking about, and really incorporating it into the curriculum as like a specific educational point. So I think it's a really important question, and I don't really think there's a specific answer yet, and that we should include educators in this discussion to see what they need, and then researchers and designers all work together to look at that.
Very good. We've talked about it mainly as a standalone at the moment. What are there prospects for social VR and AR that will help us? We've talked a lot about inclusion, that will help us bring students together across distance to share experiences, to co-create, to collaborate. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything like that. One thing came to mind when you were asking that question was just seeing how teachers have been creative in bringing one headset or two headsets into their classroom and setting up station models, or we've had some kind of savvy teachers who were able to project the experience or maybe put students into partners or put them into a group so that they can watch somebody else going through the experience, and then they might have like a structured worksheet or something where they're taking notes. And that was a way, just a creative way that educators have made it so that multiple students could experience it at the same time.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that's one actual benefit of AR, especially mobile AR with smartphones and tablets. It really allows for these more collaborative and social experiences for students to all work together as they see these virtual elements. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration and social interactions with the students.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for your contributions and for your lightning talks. And I'm going to throw it back to Michael, who's going to tell us what comes next.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, Julia, Sam, and also for Idris and Regine, who had to leave early, unfortunately. In fact, I think Regine is catching a flight, and so she just worked us into her schedule. So in any event, it was wonderful. And I hope folks will now go together into networking breakout sessions that we've set up on 3 of the topics we just talked about. They are assessments featuring Sam, whom you just met, augmented reality with Julia, and accessibility. And although Regine was unable to stay, we have other folks who will be there for the conversation. So my instructions are, go to the reception/agenda area, select the breakout session you'd like to join, and then you can get together informally with whoever's there and discuss whatever you want to talk about for a few minutes. I think in our calendar, our schedule, we were going to come back to the room at 1:50, but that's 9 minutes from now. Why don't we say, I don't know, 10 minutes from now is 1:50. Well, let's say 1:55. We'll give you guys 13 minutes to chit chat a little bit and discuss ideas and maybe take a bio break if you need one. And then we'll see you back here for the teen survey. Thank you so much, and see you on the other side.